welcome to this special edition of Vantage. We are in Dubai for the COP28 summit. Leaders and government officials have started arriving from all over the world. Slowly, the buzz is building up. We visited the Dubai Expo City earlier today. That's where the COP28 will begin tomorrow. And I must say, it's a different sort of summit. What stands out is the level of public participation. Thousands of activists and scientists have flown in. The idea is to make the COP people-driven. On the flip side, that's a lot of flights and emissions, especially for a summit on climate change. We'll bring you all that and more in our exclusive ground report. But first, the headlines tonight. India signs a peace deal with Manipur's oldest armed group. The United National Liberation Front has agreed to give up violence. In the month of May, ethnic clashes erupted in Manipur, and since then, it's the first time an armed group has entered a peace deal with the centre. Iran's foreign minister blames US visa delay for missing a key UN meet in New York on Gaza. Despite the minister's absence, Tehran says it will push for the truce to be extended. The 6-day truce between Israel and Hamas is set to expire tomorrow. Russia mulls a loyalty pledge for foreigners. Foreigners entering Russia could be required to sign a loyalty agreement upon arrival. It would bar them from criticizing Moscow's offensive in Ukraine. Foreigners would also not be allowed to make positive statements about the LGBTQ community. Sweden enters recession as inflation hits consumers. The Scandinavian country is one of the worst economic performers in the European Union. Sweden has been fighting high inflation as well as a depreciating currency, the krona. Singapore mulls artificial islands for its coastal defence. The aim is to protect low-lying areas against rising sea levels caused by climate change. Studies for the Long Island project will start in 2024 and take 5 years to finish. And the wall is still standing. Rahul Dravid gets an extension as the coach of the Indian men's cricket team. This comes despite the heartbreaking loss in the World Cup final. Dravid took over from Ravi Shastri in 2021. Our top story tonight is about India's economic growth perspectives. A new report has come out. It's by the rating agency Standard & Poor, or S&P. And it showed confidence in India and its economy. S&P is one of the big three global ratings agencies. They track and regularly update economic growth forecasts. And this agency has revised India's growth forecast. It is now 6.4% for next year, up from the earlier projection of 6%, which means the country is doing better than expected in the current fiscal. Although 2025 is now predicted to be slower, from 6.9% to 6.4%, and that's the S&P forecast, lower than India's own estimate of 6.6%. That's by the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank of the country. So basically, India will grow strong this year, and the momentum will continue in 2025. And then in 2026, there's another big bump due. That's when India's growth rate should hit 7%, making it one of the leading growth engines of Asia. Now, let me tell you why this is a very significant report. Think about what's going on in the world at the moment. The war and instability in West Asia, the conflict in Ukraine that shows no signs of ending. There are also constant tensions between the US and China. All these things are bad for business everywhere in the world. And they seem to be getting worse at every turn. Despite all this, India remains resilient. And not just resilient, India is defying expectations. And that is why this report is so important. It's optimistic about India and some other Asian nations. Vietnam, for instance, is projected to grow at 6.8%, the Philippines at 6.4%, Indonesia at 5%. These are the figures for 2026. So S&P is predicting a rising Asia, and this rise will be powered by India. Now, you may have noticed one major omission in the countries that we mentioned. This list does not include China, Asia's old economic driver. S&P's outlook for China is not rosy. The headline itself says, China slows, India grows. And here's what the numbers say. China would grow at 5.4% this year. That's better than previous projections, but after that, China's growth will stagnate. 4.6% in 2024, 4.8% in 2025, and again 4.6% in 2026. Do you know the last time this happened? The last time China had 2 consecutive years of growth below 5%. 1989 and 1990, just after the Tiananmen crackdown, almost 35 years ago. And now it's happening again. So China's golden age of growth may be nearing its end. And there are a number of reasons for this. Its debt-laden property sector is on the brink. S&P says that's a major reason for the slowing growth, the low demand for properties and the resulting strain on developers. But that is not the only reason. There are also geopolitical tensions. The world is finally waking up to the dangers of investing in China. They're either trying to decouple or de-risk. Countries are looking at alternatives, turning to India, Vietnam and other Asian nations. The latest reports say Apple manufacturer Foxconn plans to invest $1.5 billion in India. Tesla is eyeing a $2 billion investment. All of these companies have major factories in China already, but now they're looking at India. So it's not a coincidence that India is seen as Asia's growth engine. The S&P report also highlights higher domestic demand as a major growth driver, which again puts India in the driver's seat. India has a relatively young and upwardly mobile population. And these people will continue to generate the demand for goods and services. China, on the other hand, is aging rapidly. Its internal demand is faltering. Now, when you connect all these dots, you get the big picture. China's era is coming to a close. It will begin to stagnate unless it can fix its underlying issues, which is a tall order. So it's more likely that the baton has truly been passed. The future belongs to India. We still have a long way to go, a lot to do to catch up. But it seems like we're on our way.
To my mind, the #1 priority for this COP is to recognize that business as usual has to be dropped.
We're hours away from the COP28 summit. Leaders and officials have started arriving. They will soon buckle in for days of hard negotiations. Things can get heated at COP summits. Things can also run past deadlines. It's one of the many challenges at COP. Earlier today, we visited the summit venue at the Dubai Expo City. It's a sprawling complex in the middle of nowhere. But starting tomorrow, it's where the planet's fate will be decided. So what are the expectations from this meeting? What does COP hope to achieve? Will this be a good COP or a bad COP? And what are the challenges? Our next report tells you. Which is the most important building in the world? You would think it's the White House or the Kremlin or the Indian Parliament, but you would be wrong. As of this week, the most important building in the world is the one that is right behind me, the Dubai Expo Center. In just a few hours from now, thousands of delegates from across the world will descend on this building. Hundreds are already pouring in. These are world leaders, religious leaders, activists, corporate bigwigs. And what is their job? To save the planet, to strike unanimous agreements on how to save the world. Dubai as a city is extra, and the Dubai City Expo all the more. Its tech-savvy halls are ready to host the most important summit of its times, the COP28. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It includes every member of the United Nations Climate Framework established in 1992. And 28? Well, that's the number of summits. Last year's summit in Egypt was COP27, so this year's summit is COP28. The vibe here, as they say, is mixed. The young Gen Z activists look optimistic, but the veteran bureaucrats look more circumspect. They've been on this rodeo before. They know what happens here is all about political will. So who's attending this time? Well, it's easier to say who's not. US President Joe Biden is not coming. Neither is Chinese President Xi Jinping. Both leaders are sending their climate envoys instead. And it's a very poor message to the world. The US and China are the two biggest polluters on this planet, but their presidents are a no-show. Tells you how much significance they attach to this summit. Does that mean the summit is doomed for failure? Maybe not. Some 70,000 delegates are expected to attend COP28. They will come from 200 plus countries and regions. It's likely to be the most attended COP in the summit's history. The one in Glasgow, for example, had just 38,000 participants. Dubai is hosting nearly twice that number. The idea is to bring in as many voices as possible. Of course, the downside is the carbon footprint. What message does it send when thousands of people fly in to attend a climate summit on cutting emissions? It's counterproductive at best, hypocrisy at worst. But the attendance is not the headline here. That would be the negotiations. The summit will run from November 30th to December 12th. But don't be surprised if the talks are extended. In Egypt last year, the negotiations ran for 2 extra days. Chances are we could see a repeat. But what exactly will be up for discussion? Well, COP28 is about 2 major issues. The first is the global stocktake. Think of it as a routine assessment program. In 2015, countries signed the Paris Agreement. They agreed to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's time to take stock, to see how well or how bad the world is doing. Spoiler alert, we are doing bad. At the current rate, global emissions will fall 2% by 2030. But to hit the Paris target, they should fall by 43%. So the world is a long way off.
Help! Our patient is dying!
The second issue is that of loss and damages. Basically, who will pay for all the climate-related destruction? Just consider Pakistan. The country makes up just 1% of all emissions since the industrial age. But recently, super floods have ravaged Pakistan. While the floods are not new, their scale has been multiplied by climate change. And the damages? Up to $30 billion. At COP27 in Egypt, countries agreed to create a fund to support such countries. Just one problem. We haven't seen the money yet. The Global South wants rich countries to foot the bill. At least $100 billion by 2030. After all, it's their pollution that brought us here. But rich countries are reluctant. They say it's now a common responsibility. This rich versus poor debate is a common theme at every COP. So expect the same fireworks here in Dubai as well. There is also the issue of fossil fuels. And here in the UAE, it's all the more important. At the last COP summit, countries agreed to phase out coal. So naturally this time they're expected to phase out fossil fuels. But whether that happens or not could depend on the host. The UAE produces 4 million barrels of oil every day. Oil makes up more than 35% of their total revenue. So will they agree to phasing out oil? Logic says they won't. Recent reports have added to that worry. They suggest that the UAE tried to use the COP summit to strike oil and gas deals. If true, this represents a conflict of interest. But even so, it could be the best bet. The oil and gas industry makes up 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So without them, you cannot cut down pollution. You need their support and money, especially now. 2022 was a blockbuster year for big oil. They booked $200 billion in profits. Governments need to convince them to invest some of that money in green energy. If not, the clean pivot will be delayed. A lot of the results here will depend on leadership, on what sort of concessions the rich countries are willing to make. But time is of the essence. 2023 is on track to be the hottest year on record. It's become an annual trend now. Every year is becoming the hottest on record. We have seen super floods, biblical droughts and supercharged typhoons. The 1.5 degree global warming target is all but gone, so the United Nations is rightly worried. They have asked world leaders to stop dawdling and start doing. But we say, good luck.
The biggest issue, I guess, is that of trust. There is none left among the public. We've seen the commitments of the Paris Agreement being ignored by world leaders. So there's a fair bit of cynicism about what happens here over the next 2 weeks. It's a legitimate question that young people have. Climate commitments are non-binding, so governments drag their feet. Rich countries are in no hurry to fund climate action. So you could say that expectations are low at this COP summit, which is ironic because their job is to literally save the world. There is also the issue of politics. You would think a global existential crisis would make politicians keep their differences aside. Well, think again. The next year's COP summit doesn't even have a host. Technically, it's supposed to be held in Eastern Europe. But amid the war in Ukraine, Russia says they won't allow it. Tells you how precarious things are.
The world is already off track when it comes to climate action. It cannot afford political delays and geopolitical standoffs. But such is the background of every COP: politics, double standards, and low expectations. It may not be the best bet to tackle climate change, but right now, it's the only one we have. While countries navigate through COP politics, climate change will not wait for us to settle our squabbles. As we speak, the climate crisis is claiming more lives. Every corner of the globe has been affected. Let's look at what's happening one continent at a time, and we start with South America. Wildfires are burning through one nation after another. 7.5 million hectares of land have been scorched in Bolivia alone. The country has seen more than 12,700 fires this year, 12,700 this year. Wildfire smoke is choking its cities. And many have lost everything.
Everything was burnt. Crops, vegetation, cuttings, coffee plantations, citric plantations, banana plantations. In other words, it devastated everything. It didn't leave anything.
A lot of this damage is permanent. The forests may never heal.
And the reality we're living at the moment in Bolivia, that many of these forests won't restore at all, because we're living these effects of the climate change, of the environmental degradation we're causing in Bolivia itself.
It's the same story in neighboring Brazil. Fires have laid waste to the world's largest wetlands. The ecological gold mine is now a graveyard.
When we carried out an active search in the burned areas, we found what was a large corixo, which is a watercourse, and in that place we found hundreds of dead animals, mainly reptiles and amphibians.
In Europe, we're seeing the opposite. Snowstorms are wreaking havoc. War-torn Ukraine, in particular, is struggling to cope. The storms have cut electricity to thousands. Some have even died due to the bitter cold.
It is undoubtedly a catastrophe on a huge scale. Not only for the city, it's a statewide disaster. Some 150 up to 200,000 residents of this district have been left without heating.
I start crying when I think about the soldiers. It's hard to imagine what it feels like there.
And Russia is faring no better. Winter has arrived in Moscow. Storms are battering the annexed region of Crimea, and hundreds have been evacuated amid the freezing rain. Rain is also devastating Africa, the Horn of Africa region. This area is drought prone. It has been parched for years. Rains arrived here a few weeks ago, but instead of relief, they brought just misery. Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, all these countries are reeling now, and there's no end in sight.
Overall, we have now roughly 650,000 people displaced, and 1.4, 1.5 million, to be very honest, nobody really knows the concrete figures, are going to be affected. That is now, but we have currently a confluence still of the Indian Ocean dipole, of El Nino. We have a cyclone building up in the Indian Ocean.
He mentioned the El Nino. It's a natural weather phenomenon. It occurs once every few years, and it brings heat and rain to regions around the equator. But climate change has made the El Nino more powerful. It has been supercharged, and it is now unleashing its fury all over the world. Eastern Australia is among the regions bearing the brunt. It was scorched by bushfires a few weeks ago, and now parts of it are underwater. Everywhere you look, climate change is leaving an impact. The challenge before world leaders at the COP28 is staggering. They must work together to change course. If not, then what you just saw will only be the beginning. It is day 54 of the Israel-Hamas war. More hostages were released, more prisoners were exchanged, families are united, Gazans are breathing a sigh of relief, aid is entering the Gaza Strip. Things seem calmer, at least for now, which means that the truce is holding. But will this temporary truce turn into a permanent ceasefire? It depends on the appetite for war. Israel has plenty of it, it seems. They want to destroy Hamas. The world, on the other hand, not so much. Any war is bad for the world, for the economy, plus wars are costly. Israel is not too worried on that front. Why? Because it has the United States covering its back. America has pledged $14.3 billion in aid for Israel, and there's likely to be more, which is hardly surprising. From 1948 to 2023, America has given Israel $124 billion in aid. That's both military and economic assistance. And that's not all. There's also been extra aid, like $10 billion for the development of the Iron Dome. Since 2004, Washington has been giving Israel $3 billion every year. That's a lot of money. And this makes Israel the largest recipient of U.S. security aid. The U.S. also accounts for 92% of Israeli arms imports, which means without American weapons, Israel cannot sustain itself. Plus, there are subsidies. Israel can buy weapons at subsidized rates. U.S. defense contractors get benefits like steady contracts, so it's a win-win for both. But do you know who's losing out? The American taxpayers. They are the ones footing the bill for all of this, and most of them do not even want to do it. According to a new survey, only 32% Americans say the U.S. should support Israel militarily. 68% say there should be a ceasefire. So there's little appetite for war in America, and it's understandable. Americans are grappling with high inflation. Food prices are up 25% since 2020. Rents are up by 20%. Electricity up by 25% again. And car insurance is up by 33%. Housing is becoming unaffordable. The cost of living crisis is squeezing savings. And credit card debt is soaring. Meanwhile, America's national debt is inching close to the $34 trillion mark, $34 trillion. So Americans feel they can ill afford to pay for another war. And yet, the Biden administration has been sending arms and more to Israel. Since the 7th of October this year, since the attack by Hamas, there have been direct commercial sales, meaning U.S. defense contractors have been selling directly to Israel. Pending orders have been pushed up. Pentagon stockpiles have been redirected to West Asia. Plus, some in the administration have a stake in this. Take U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, for example. He's a former board member of Raytheon. The company is now known as RTX. It's a military contractor that provides weapons to Israel. Then there is Secretary of State Antony Blinken. In 2017, he co-founded West Exec Advisors. It works for military contractors, startups, and Israeli companies. And Blinken has advised Boeing, according to his financial disclosure. Boeing is supplying weapons to Israel too. So Biden's team was advising military contractors, and now the Biden administration is sending weapons to Israel, weapons that Israel uses to fight this war. And funding all of this are U.S. tax dollars, basically American citizens, some of whom say they did not even sign up for this. So Israel is heavily reliant on the U.S., which gives the Americans a lot of leverage too. They can force Prime Minister Netanyahu to end the war. A ceasefire is already in place. Will America make a push to make it permanent? The decision will be both political and financial. Now let's turn to Russia and their ongoing war with Ukraine. Winter is setting in. Both sides are fortifying their positions. Zelensky's counteroffensive has stalled. Russia still occupies parts of eastern Ukraine. The fighting is almost a stalemate. And the war is nearing the 2-year mark. So who will blink first? Ukraine has its hopes pegged on the F-16 fighter jets. Kiev is likely to get the first batch before the new year. Russia, on the other hand, is turning to something more covert. Poison. A weapon that Vladimir Putin has used time and time again, mostly to silence his critics. But now poison has made its way to the war in Ukraine. And do you know who was the first target? It was this woman, Mariana Budanova, the wife of Ukraine's spy chief, Kyrylo Budanov. She lives with her husband in fortified headquarters. She's also a close aide to Kiev's mayor. And now this woman has been poisoned. Reports say the Ukrainian intelligence has confirmed this. Ukraine's main intelligence unit is called the GUR. Apparently, several other GUR officials have also been poisoned. They're all hospitalized. Ukraine says that traces of heavy metals were traced in their blood tests. And these are substances not found in ordinary civilian life. The GUR spy unit says They're not sure how and when the poisoning took place, and that's alarming if you're the Ukrainian spy chief, because it raises serious questions like, has there been a breach in Ukraine's intelligence unit? Have Russian spies infiltrated Ukraine? And it seems like it, because ever since the war began, this is the first targeting of the family of a high-profile Ukrainian leader, at least the first that we know of. But what does Moscow have to say about all of this? They have reportedly put the blame on Ukraine, and they're calling it a case of infighting. Which also brings us to the question, why was Mariana Budanova, of all people in Ukraine, poisoned? Why was she the intended target? Or was she the intended target? Was it her spy chief husband? Kirilo Budanov is known for being a versatile spy master. He's only 37 years old, a lieutenant general, and he has been the chief of Ukraine's main spy agency since 2020. He's known for masterminding several attacks deep inside Russian territory. In Ukraine, Budanov is known for irritating Moscow. But in Russia, he's branded as a hate figure. He's on the hit list of Russian agencies. And how do we know that? Because there have been at least 10 assassination attempts on Budanov. You heard that right. This man has escaped death 10 times, including a botched car bombing in 2019. So clearly, Budanov is a great escape artist. And it seems like this really irks Russia. Moscow has its own list of charges against him. They say Budanov's unit was linked to the killing of Russians. Vladimir Tatarsky, a pro-war Russian blogger, and Daria Dugina, a pro-war journalist, also the daughter of a close ally of Putin. Both of them were killed on Russian soil, and that makes Budanov a prime target for Russia. So who became collateral? His wife. Also, this is not the first time that Russia has been accused of using poison as a weapon. Russian spies are known for covert poisoning. The biggest victims have been critics of Putin. The most prominent one is Alexei Navalny, Putin's most vocal opposition leader. He's now serving a 30-year jail term. This is after he was given an additional prison term of 19 years. In 2020, Navalny attended an election rally in Siberia. On his flight back to Moscow, he drank a cup of tea. He then fell ill and slipped into a coma. He was airlifted to Germany for treatment. His blood report showed traces of Novichok, a lethal nerve agent. Then there's former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter, Yulia. They were poisoned in front of their home in London. This was in 2018. And the nerve agent used? It was Novichok again. Vladimir Kara-Murza, another Putin critic, was poisoned twice, in 2015 and 2017. Both times the blood tests revealed traces of heavy metal, the kind found in the blood of the Ukrainian spy chief's wife. The list goes on. Using poison is a favorite trick in Russia's playbook, and now it seems to have made its way to the Ukrainian battlefield. And staying with Russia, Moscow is engaged in another spat, this time with a NATO member. It started as a border crisis, but it has snowballed into a national security issue. Finland has closed all its border crossings with Russia. They will be closed for the next 2 weeks.
We consider this is an issue of national security. In our case, Russian authorities have allowed persons without necessary documents to travel to Finland. We have continued to see that Russian border service is even assisting them to reach Finland. Due to the rapid increase of the illegal entry, strong measures have been needed. We have closed all our border stations on the eastern border except one. And we are ready to close the last one if needed.
So where did it begin? Finland and Russia share Europe's largest border, around 1,340 kilometers long. There are multiple border crossings along the length. Since the month of September, Finland witnessed a surge in refugees. Most of them were from West Asia and Africa. They came from the Russian side and they came on brand new bicycles. I know that's an odd detail to give, but it is quite important here because you cannot walk on foot between Russian and Finnish border checkpoints. That is the law. You cannot walk. So the refugees came. They crossed the Russian checkpoint, they cycled over their way to Finland, and soon they were in the country seeking asylum. In November alone, Finland has had 900 asylum seekers, which may seem like a small number, but at this border, it is quite a big figure. Because this is not easy terrain to navigate. It is hostile. Plus, in winter, the temperatures are freezing. So first, Finland closed a few border crossings, then they banned crossing by bicycle, and now they have shut down the entire border. Their reasoning? Finland says Russia is weaponizing migrants.
Hybrid attacks or hybrid efforts from Russia do not surprise us. And now this is coming in this way to Finland because the border is there. And we have to realize that in the same way that cyber attacks are a shared responsibility, so it's also a shared responsibility to protect the Finnish border.
So Helsinki believes this is Moscow's hybrid warfare. But why is Moscow suddenly attacking them? Finland says it's got to do with NATO. This year, Finland joined the military alliance, NATO. That did not go down too well with Russia. So now they are funneling migrants. Russia, on the other hand, has rubbished these allegations. It is calling them, and I'm quoting, absurd. So there's hostility with one NATO member, but the Russian foreign minister seems to be visiting another. That's Sergei Lavrov. He will be in North Macedonia later this week. This is for a meeting of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation. It was set up during the Cold War to diffuse tensions between the East and the West. Now, this group has 57 members. Russia is one of them. So their minister, Lavrov, is going to North Macedonia for the summit. It's his first visit to a NATO country since the war began. What does this gesture mean? Is it mere attendance, or is Moscow softening its stance? Is it looking for a way to end the war? And there's a reason why I ask this. Listen to what Vladimir Putin said just a few days ago.
Yes, of course. Military actions are always a tragedy for specific people, specific families, and the whole country. Of course, we must think about how to stop this tragedy. By the way, Russia has never refused peace negotiations with Ukraine.
Of course, those could be just words. With Putin, you never know. But one thing is for sure. The Ukraine war has gone on for 644 days, so fatigue is setting in. There have been offensives, there have been counter-offensives, but nothing conclusive. Ukraine has not capitalized on its gains. It is staring at a second winter of war, and a much harsher one this time. Plus, the world's focus has shifted. It is now on Gaza, and Moscow knows all of this. And perhaps this is what Putin was waiting for Western support to fade. If that happens, Zelensky will be left out in the cold. Russia will have an upper hand and a choice to end this war on its own terms. But let me tell you, Israel is hardly the only one in need of a benefactor. Yemen needs money too. It's one of the poorest West Asian nations. And now it may have a quick fix, thanks to Yemeni social media influencers. I'll tell you why. On the 19th of November, Yemeni Houthis seized a ship in the Red Sea, a Japanese-operated cargo ship apparently linked to Israel. But this isn't just a hijacked ship anymore. It has become quite the party central, with social media influencers climbing aboard, holding photo shoots, dance parties and hookah sessions. And they suggest Houthis sell the ship to raise money for Yemen. Our next report tells you more about this bizarre tourist hotspot.
Looks like quite the party, right? Coordinated dance moves with rifles and flags in hand. Big smiles on faces. Believe it or not, this party central is a captured ship. On November 19th, Yemeni Houthis seized a ship in the Red Sea. It's called Galaxy Leader. It's a Japanese-operated cargo ship, apparently with Israeli links. According to reports, it's partly owned by an Israeli businessman. When the ship was seized by Houthis, furore ensued. 25 crew members were held hostage. There were fears of regional tensions heightening. Houthi rebels control northern Yemen and its Red Sea coast. Since October 7th, they've launched several missile and drone attacks against Israel. Then they hijacked this ship over its supposed connection to Israel.
The Yemeni armed forces confirmed the continuation of carrying out military operations against the Israeli enemy until the aggression on the Gaza Strip stops and the ongoing heinous crimes against our Palestinian brothers in Gaza and the West Bank cease.
Hamas applauded this move.
This is a welcome step from the Yemeni forces, and I believe that the size of the Zionist crime committed in Gaza makes every loyalist eager to defend and support the Palestinian people with all he can. Therefore, my greetings to them.
But Israel has denied any links to this ship. It called the incident an Iranian act of terrorism. Iran has been widely accused of backing Houthis, so Iran responded too.
The Zionist regime's claims are futile and reflect the difficult situation in which the Zionist regime finds itself.
So off-ship, a diplomatic face-off is underway, but on board, it's a hijacking hoedown. This ship has become quite the tourist attraction. Houthi youth and Yemeni social media influencers have been visiting the Galaxy Leader. Throngs of people are arriving in boats, attempting an arduous climb. Because where's the thrill in wearing life jackets, right? Then holding photo shoots, dance parties, hookah sessions, even making it a learning experience by using the vessel's equipment. Social media influencers are filming all of this and unabashedly uploading it on their social media platforms. And they're even suggesting that the Houthis sell such hijacked ships to make a quick buck for Yemen. Only time will tell if the rebels take them up on this financial advice. If so, Houthis may have a serious stream of money. After all, this isn't the first or last ship to be seized by them.
The Yemeni armed forces reiterate their warning to all ships affiliated with the Israeli enemy or those dealing with it that they will become legitimate targets for the armed forces.
In a recent incident on November 28th, the US Navy reportedly captured 5 pirates. They had attempted to hijack the Central Park, a tanker reportedly run by an Israeli businessman in the Gulf of Aden near Somalia. This is a grave matter, one that showcases rising risks in global shipping with the potential for dangerous spillovers. But it seems Houthis couldn't care less. They're dancing away their worries, quite literally.
Now let's take a look at what's happening in China. Hundreds of athletes are reportedly undergoing military training. It's a campaign aimed at instilling military-like discipline. Some of the participants are just 7 years old. Think about that. A 7-year-old child who wants to play sports is performing military drills. China says it wants to create what it calls an Iron Army. Athletes are being taught military combat doctrines. China's Sports Bureau says the drills will instill a fighting ability in the athletes. Fighting ability. Last month, China adopted a new education law to increase patriotic spirit among the youth. And throughout the year, Xi Jinping has called for greater combat readiness. So are child soldiers a part of Xi's plan? Here's our report.
Imagine you're 7 years old. You love playing football and it's your dream to play for your country. Your parents sign you up for a coaching camp so that you can improve your skills. But when you reach the training camp, you are handed a military-like uniform. And instead of running around on the football field, you're marching and doing drills, almost like you're in the army. That's what's happening in China. Hundreds of athletes are undergoing military training in the Chinese city of Shanghai. According to officials from the Sports Bureau, the aim of the training is to instill discipline and competitiveness among the athletes. At least 900 young adults are a part of the military training. Some of them are just 7 years old. The Shanghai Sports Bureau says that athletes are aged between 7 and 25. That's right, children are undergoing military training. And here's what the curriculum looks like in the week-long camp. The athletes are doing a deep and detailed study on the combat doctrines of the Chinese army. Sports players are being taught how to march and parade like soldiers. They are learning military etiquette, and for some of the children, even weapons training is part of the schedule. China says it wants to create a quote-unquote iron army of sports players. The training is meant to enhance team bonding while also creating a sense of patriotism. Here's what one of the coaches had to say. From dawn until broad daylight, the athletes move neatly and in unison, their youth military uniforms showing off a young and elegant manner. This is not the first time that children and young athletes are being given military-like training in China. The country's national football teams have also previously undergone similar training. Even China's Olympic athletes are put through military drills, and it looks like the phenomenon is likely to become more common. Last month, China adopted a new education law. The new law seeks to impart a patriotic spirit among China's youth. Chinese President Xi Jinping has repeatedly called for more patriotic sentiment among the younger generation. Xi says that patriotism will enhance China's unity. Throughout this year, he has called for higher combat readiness for China's military. This includes more training and drills. And it looks like children in China have no choice but to take part in them.
Now let's look at West Asia. The region is a complex web of partnerships and rivalries. You have countries that may be historical enemies, but they will join forces against a common threat. And that's been one of the outcomes of the Israel-Hamas war. It has served to polarize the already tense region. It has brought together countries with competing interests. Like in the case of Iran, the Arab nations and Turkey, all three factions have come out in support of the Palestinians. Iran and Turkey in particular. Iran, of course, hates Israel. It funds Hamas and a number of other proxy groups across West Asia. Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has a different approach though. Erdogan sees himself as the spiritual successor to the last Ottoman caliph. He always has something to say about the plight of Muslims in other nations, and he's been a vocal critic of Israel during this war.
Netanyahu, who has carried out one of the biggest cruelties of the last century in Gaza, has already written his name in history as the butcher of Gaza.
So the war was seen as a coming together of Turkey and Iran, common ground between the rivals. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi was due to visit Turkey today. It would have been his first official visit to the country. Turkish media had been talking about the trip until yesterday, but then the visit got cancelled, or at the very least postponed. Ankara says Raisi would not be visiting today, and that's all. They did not give any explanation. Iranian media says the trip has been postponed, but they've not given a new date. So it's all very vague, which makes you wonder why. Did something happen in the last few hours? Erdogan and Raisi reportedly spoke to each other this weekend. After the call, Iran's foreign minister said, and I quote, "With the continuation of high-level diplomacy between the two countries, the two sides can see the strengthening and deepening of mutual cooperation." It all sounds very positive. So what went wrong? Did old issues derail the newfound friendship? You see, Iran and Turkey do not see eye to eye on a number of matters, even on Israel. While Erdogan was quick to criticize Israel, he's not backed his words with action. Turkey and Israel share trade and energy ties, and those are still in place. Despite all of Erdogan's rhetoric, he's doing good business with Israel. Reports say Iran wants that to change. It wants Erdogan to cut economic links with Israel, which Ankara seems unwilling to do, at least for now. So that's the first problem. Then there are problems that do not involve Israel, but another battlefield in the region. Iran and Turkey stand on opposite sides of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. This is over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia versus Azerbaijan. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan claim this area, Nagorno-Karabakh. It has been a self-governed area by ethnic Armenians for decades. But in September, Azerbaijan began a lightning assault, and within a day, it took over the breakaway enclave. And this has strained ties between Iran and Turkey. Turkey has always backed Azerbaijan. Iran has historically supported Armenia. So Ankara and Tehran have been at odds over this as well. And this problem is set to escalate because a trade route has been proposed between Azerbaijan and Turkey. Look at where it could come up, near Iran's northern border. And that could hamper Iran's access to Armenia. It would cut them off from a historical ally. So this is another major fault line in their relations. As I said, West Asia is riddled with unusual partnerships and rivalries, and it seems they will always come in the way of any united front in the region. And now let's talk about hungry monsters in space, black holes. They are places of no return, regions in space with immensely strong gravity. Black holes can consume entire stars, imprison light, and wreck galaxies.
They're intimidating beings. But not because of these facts alone. It's because of how much we still do not know about black holes. But don't fret, Earthlings are dedicated beings. Now, a new study is out. It talks about a supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy, which is spinning so rapidly, it is altering space-time around it. How does this work? Our next report tells you this and more.
Remember this little guy? Now, don't be mistaken, it only looks like a tiny blurry donut, but this is a supermassive black hole, a gravitational monstrosity called Sagittarius A.
A source that has been a focus of intense astronomical studies for decades. Observations of stars orbiting around it revealed the presence of an object that is very massive, 4 million times the mass of our Sun, but also very faint.
It's located 26,000 light-years from Earth. It lurks at the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. And last year, it made a big splash, thanks to an earth-shattering photo. The black hole was photographed. It became the second black hole image unveiled, first from our galaxy. This unleashed a vortex of memes. Some called it a blurry-looking eyeball. Others called it a situation of filters versus reality. As anticlimactic as the picture may have been, it invited quite the buzz. And now the black hole is back at it. A new study is out. It says the supermassive black hole is spinning rapidly. Now, this is not too surprising. Some black holes are known to do that. So the question is not really whether a black hole rotates. It is how fast does it rotate? And Sagittarius A is spinning fast. This is fascinating. Because when the black hole spins really fast, it fuses time and space together. So Sagittarius A is altering space-time. It's one of the most intriguing things about black holes. These hungry beasts are infinitely exciting. We call them so because they swallow up everything too close. Anything that is too small or too slow to fight their gravitational force. They can swallow entire stars and planets. Even light can't escape. And with every bit of mass they eat, black holes grow. Sounds gory. But pretty much everything we know about the universe depends on black holes. So it is ironic how little we know about them. In fact, if you fell into a black hole, it's unclear how you would die. Will its gravity rip you apart? Will it crush you? Will you fall into the black hole's core or get throttled against its wall? No one knows, and it's one of the biggest debates in physics. The fun part is, even a new small piece of information could alter everything we know about how the universe works. It's exciting and explains why a faded, bagel-esque image of a black hole would enthrall scientists. So, with this new study too, knowing our very own supermassive black hole can help us know more about its species. And us, mere Earthlings, can't wait to swallow more knowledge about these beasts.
And now it's time for Vantage shots. Images that tell the story. In the Arctic Circle, a kayaker descended down a 65-foot-long ice waterfall, setting a new record. In Paris, work begins on the iconic Notre Dame spire that burned down in 2019. And 5 present and former U.S. First Ladies gathered to honor former First Lady Rosalind Carter at her memorial. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted to partition Palestine. The plan was to divide it in 2 separate states, a Jewish and an Arab one. And this led to the creation of Israel in 1948. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Please be seated. I want to welcome all of you here.
President Carter, President Biden, Dr. Biden, Vice President Harris, the second gentleman, President Clinton, Secretary Clinton. Without Rosalind Carter, I don't believe there would have been a President Carter.
While I am away, I try to convince myself that you really are not, could not be